Welcome, everyone. I'm Robin Tuohy, Vice President Patient Support at the International Myeloma Foundation. It's my pleasure to host this evening's Living Well webinar on clinical trials and why they're important to you. Tonight, we'll learn from Dr. Joseph Mikhael, Chief Medical Officer at the IMF, and also from Brian McMahon, founder of SparkCures. For those of you who may not know Brian yet, he is a 4-time cancer caregiver, a recipient of the 40 Under 40 in Cancer Award, and an avid music theater fan, and of course, a father of 2 amazing little girls. So Brian started SparkCures based on his experience as a care partner and seeing firsthand how confusing and difficult it can be for patients and families to understand and connect with their clinical trial options. So the IMF partnered with SparkCures last year, and this resource is now available on the IMF website for your ease. So thank you for joining us. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong deck here. Okay, so we are now looking at how do you participate today. So when you do have questions for our panel, you just simply open that Q&A window, and that allows you to ask your questions to the hosts and the panelists. And again, if we don't answer your questions today, please reach out to our info line at 1-800-452-2873, or you can email them at infoline@myeloma.org. So today, as a follow-up to our workshop, we will have the speaker slides and a video replay available for you. And you can get there. Right now, you're looking at myeloma.org. And this gray box is if you click on publications and videos. And you can see in the middle there, it says IMF videos. You can just slide right down and click that on Living Well, and you'll be able to replay tonight's video. And as always, it's so important for you to let us know how you valued this program. What can we continue to do for you in the future? What other programs can we bring to you? And what are your questions and input? So please participate in that feedback. We really appreciate your time on that. We thank our sponsors, and tonight that is Johnson & Johnson and Regeneron. Well, guess what? It's still my Myeloma Action Month. It's March. We're almost through March. I can't believe how quickly it's flying by. And we hope that all of you have taken action during this month. And why is this important? Because our actions together create awareness. And how important is it for people to better understand and know of the signs and the symptoms and the tests to have before you're diagnosed with myeloma, so people can get an earlier diagnosis. And for all of you that are already here and diagnosed with myeloma, how important is it for you to have these better conversations with your doctors, your family, your friends? So let's take action together. I'd like to introduce you to my support group team. We cover the United States, and we are here for you. And if you do not know where your local support group is, please feel free to reach out to us. There are over 160 of them across the United States. In addition to our wonderful local support groups, we have these groups that we call special interest groups, and they're designed as a supplement that focus on a particular topic. So you can see here these listed: Living Solo and Strong, that's for people who do not have a care partner; Smolder Boulder, that's for smoldering patients. And I'm really excited to let you know that next month we will be launching a special interest groups for veterans who have myeloma. This is our IMF info line. It's Paul and Missy, and it's led by Teresa Michelli. You can call them, you can schedule time with them, and they are a wealth of knowledge. And if you have questions again today, after today's presentation, the info line is just waiting for you tomorrow. They're looking forward to hearing from you. And if the info line isn't enough, we now have Milo. This is our AI assistant chat bot, and it's on the IMF website. It's safe, it's secure, it's closed, it's accurate. And some people call it their new boyfriend. I'm not quite sure about that, but Milo has a lot of good information. I don't want you to forget about all of the IMF publications that are available on the IMF website. This is just a sampling of those. You can download them and read them right online, or you could order them. Live patient education programs. These are so important for you. In addition to these Living Well webinars, we have 4 live patient and family seminars and 10 myeloma community workshops. These are the locations and the dates. And in addition to the in-person, you can see that we have 3 virtual myeloma community workshops. So we highly encourage you to join us at these. We look forward to seeing you. And now the upcoming programs. We've got so much going on. We've got a Q&A, another Facebook Live happening with Dr. Urvi Shah, who will really focus in on nutrition and answer your questions. You can see we've got 3 regional community workshops coming up, as well as a 5K happening in Los Angeles. So you could scan that QR code now, or we can keep moving on. And it truly is my pleasure to get to the meat and the heart of what you're all here for. And that's to hear Dr. Joseph Mikhael and Brian McMahon help you to better understand clinical trials. So Dr. Joe, if you would please take it away.
Thanks so much, Robin. Always a pleasure to be with you on the stage, and particularly a pleasure also tonight to have Brian join us. The bromance is real and live with Brian and myself. I just so impressed with him on a personal and professional level, what he does for his family, what he does for the myeloma and really the cancer community. And so I'm kind of an appetizer tonight to Brian's main dish. Of course, people are hungry now that I'm talking about that, but we are very grateful to have the opportunity to talk tonight about clinical trials. One of the things that we are so committed to at the IMF is to help patients through the whole of their journey with myeloma. And if I could sort of, in just a few sentences, capture what we're really trying to achieve tonight, is to have us realize that clinical trials are not some boutique extra add-on thing that a very few people should ever experience, but clinical trials are part of the treatment of myeloma. And our desire is to have more and more patients have access to them, to understand what's available to them. You'll be hearing so much more from Brian in particular about a very facilitated way of finding that out. And my role before that is to give us a sense of, why do we even think about doing a clinical trial? Why would I want to do a clinical trial? How could this be living well when we think about the Living Well series that we've had? And let's dive deep into clinical trials and come to appreciate what it's about. So really, in my first 15, 20 minutes here before I turn it over to Brian, is we'll just talk about, what are trials? What's the rationale for them? Like, why would we even think about including this as such an important topic tonight? What are the so-called phases of clinical trials? And then maybe even most importantly, what are the risks and benefits? Why would I consider it? And why would I maybe not consider it in certain circumstances? And we'll talk about the importance of that situation. And then I'm going to end very briefly with, as Robin has already noted, this beautiful partnership that we've developed with our friends at SparkCures, and Brian will take it from there to help us understand what that partnership means for you, or for your care partner, or for the loved one that you have with multiple myeloma. So just thinking about research in general, because clinical trials are part of, if you will, the umbrella of research in myeloma and frankly across all of medicine, is what has brought us to where we are today. I remind people that when I started in myeloma 25 years ago, most of our patients sadly didn't live more than a year or maybe 2 years, and typically they lived very difficult lives. There are some exceptions to that. We have patients living more than 20 years with myeloma, and we're thrilled to hear that, but that is by far not the norm. What has made this change? These new drugs, these new strategies, all these exciting therapies. We talk about CAR T-cell therapy, bispecifics, all these new drugs. That has been a product of research. And a big part of that research involves clinical trials. At the same time, I don't want someone to think I'm just going to kind of be a big guinea pig. And I guess I'm going to take one for the team here. And I'm going to do this for the sake of someone else later. Yes, to some degree, when you participate in a clinical trial, it may benefit other people later. But let me tell you that we want you to participate in a trial for your own benefit. It's not being selfish to say, I want to benefit from this. At the same time, I want us to reflect on the reality that research is under very tight supervision and standards. There have been some horrible things in the history of research. We're going to talk very briefly about them a little later in my talk, not to dwell on the past, but it reminds us of how careful we have to be. There are people that don't trust the medical system. There are people that have been terribly treated through clinical trials in the history of the United States and other countries. And that's why we have those protections now and why those standards are there. Are they perfect? No, nothing is perfect, but I can speak to my patients about the safety that I want to bring to them, that things are being overlooked, that we're not hiding things from people, that we want people to be engaged and aware of what's to come. And lastly, if there was one action item that I would hope everybody would take leaving tonight, it's the importance of that open, honest communication with your healthcare team when it comes to these issues. You're going to learn about this incredible tool that we have that you can find trials and learn about them. But ultimately, it comes down to that interaction with your healthcare team, whether it's your local team or the team that you're ultimately going to see for a clinical trial. That open, honest, clear communication. Let me tell you, we know that improves outcomes in myeloma when you have that kind of relationship with the team that is taking care of you. So then you say, well, why me? Like, why would I? I mean, you voted with your feet to be here tonight. We're so glad to see so many people here. We know many are watching a replay of this as we speak. But every patient has to be reviewed uniquely. But the key point about why you might want to be in a trial is that it allows access to something that's new. So when we think of the drugs and the therapies and the treatments we have in myeloma right now, there are so many of them, but there are new ones to come. And the ones that we have now are here because of clinical trials that happened before. I can think of a patient of mine who had CAR T cell therapy long before CAR T cell therapy ever got approved because they came to me to see me for a clinical trial. And at the time, the patient had essentially no other options in the treatment of myeloma. And that CAR T cell therapy provided them a very long and very good lifestyle and remission when, had they not had a clinical trial, very honestly, I wouldn't have had very much to offer him. Now, that's not every single patient's experience, but that's the concept. Let's get you access to something new so that maybe what's left of standard therapy could be delayed, could be given later. As we've said, yes, you may give contribution to the myeloma world, but it's for the present, not just for the future. For you right now, that becomes particularly important. And then sometimes, and it's not always the major driver, but sometimes financially there can be benefit because certain therapies, as we know, and treatments in general, myeloma can be very expensive. And yet, typically in a clinical trial for a new drug, that drug has to be approved. If it's not approved by the FDA, it has to be funded for you for that trial. So there have been patients that I've cared for over the years that have been able to have access to trials and access to therapies that financially otherwise would not have been accessed. That, of course, is balanced with everything in life comes with risks. And sometimes with newer drugs, we still haven't sorted out what are the potential side effects. And of course, drugs we know do have side effects. And it's not guaranteed that every drug works. Now, I can say in myeloma now, it's so competitive with all the treatments we have that typically by the time a drug gets to a clinical trial that is available to you, it's proven itself because we test, as I'm going to show you, we test it in the lab, we may test it in a mouse model or in other models before we bring it to humans. And we have so many drugs that we want to test that really only the ones that shows the most promise move forward. Well, let's talk about a few myths right to begin with, because sometimes people hear the word clinical trial and they immediately come to a conclusion. And someone says, well, if I participate in a clinical trial, I might get a placebo, not active treatment. So I'm getting nada. And that's really not the case. Not to say that there may not be a placebo in a certain kind of trial, but we know in myeloma, when someone has active disease, we would never just give them a placebo. We would give them at minimum the standard of care. Sometimes when we use a placebo, it's to prove, let's say that the standard of care is drug A, and we're trying to see if drug B can work better than A. So we're going to give a group of people drug A, we're going to give another group of people drug A plus B together. Well, we might give the people who have drug A placebo, so it may appear to them that they're getting two drugs, so that we have no confusion about who's is, so people don't know that the investigators, even the patients themselves, may not know, because that can sometimes color our vision of things. But there's no way we're going to give people nothing in myeloma. We have to give them what's appropriate treatment at the time. And so that becomes really, really important because sometimes people think, as I said, they're just a guinea pig and they're being, put onto a study that may not benefit them. Secondly, another myth, someone says, well, if I participate in a clinical trial, I can't change my mind. That's it. I'm sort of locked in. You'll take it. You'll like it. There's nothing you can do. And that's not true. We don't want people to just jump in a trial and jump out. That's why we have what's called informed consent, where people are aware of what's to come. But there are times when patients might say, look, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. You have the right to do that because you can withdraw your own consent. The third myth here, clinical trials are dangerous because they have new medicines and practices. Well, we are testing new things, as I've mentioned, and sometimes we find certain drugs come with new or different side effects than we've had before. So I'm not sugarcoating that. But at the same time, we take very careful precautions to start with lower doses, to be very careful, to watch people very closely, whether it's their physical body, their blood work, imaging, all the things that we can to detect any change early on. And then lastly, well, clinical trials are expensive and not covered by my insurance, so there's no chance I'm going to get it. There are always exceptions to the rule. We know how complicated insurance is in the United States. But in general, I can tell you, working in different contexts in different places, the vast majority of insurance companies will allow us to have patients on trial because, as I mentioned before, if patients are getting, let's say, a new drug, they can't be charged for that new drug. They can only be charged for what the standard of care approach would be, which is typically covered by a clinical trial. Very often, it's of benefit to the company, to the insurance company, to allow people to go on to clinical trials. Those are not all the myths, but that just hopefully dispels some things off the start that I know sometimes is a barrier for people. Well, how do we develop drugs in myeloma? And I could bore you at length on this slide, and I could talk about it for hours, and I could get totally nerdy and become a geek. Although, as I always say, my wife loves when I'm a little bit nerdy, and talk about all the things we do in the lab to determine how we can attack myeloma. We study myeloma day in and day out to figure out how we can attack it. But what we do is we find a way. So, for example, one of the things we do a lot of now is we find a so-called target on the outside of a myeloma cell. We see this thing sticking out of it. Sometimes we don't even know what it does, but we know that it's there. And so that's a chance to grab onto the myeloma. And so we study molecules and build molecules to try and grab onto that thing. And we do testing in the lab. And we sometimes do testing in animal studies. As I'll show you in a moment, you might be surprised that you're actually a lot more like a mouse than you might think you are. And then we bring it to clinical trials. So it's not like we're just off the cuff trying something initially in a patient. We have all this background. So even before what we call phase 1 clinical trials, we test things in the lab. We have even cell lines. So we have clumps of myeloma cells, if you will, that live in a petri dish of some sort, and we can test on that. We know it's not perfect. It doesn't fully reflect what happens in a human, but it's a start. We sometimes then bring it into an animal model because we know mice can be a lot like myeloma when it comes to their immune systems. And then we bring it to patients the first time, what's called a first in human study. And I have the privilege of leading a lot of these first in human studies where we really start with, if you will, baby doses to try to see if this drug is going to work. And that's part of the first phase of trials, what we call phase 1. So a phase 1 trial is really focused on making sure we find the safe dose to give patients. What is the best dose for patients? And it's built on the premise of saying we start low and we build up. I don't want people to experience a lot of side effects. We're usually pretty good at predicting what people have. Sometimes at the very early phases of these studies, there are patients getting very, very low doses. But thankfully, very often we allow people, if that low dose doesn't work, to then be able to escalate to the high dose, assuming they don't have any significant side effects. And this is very important as we study patients. Once we've discovered that dose, let's say we figured out, oh, this great drug, it seems to be safe, and when we give it at 10 milligrams. But we want to know really how well it works. The phase one, we tested in a small number of people, and for most of our phase ones, we have to show a certain percentage of them responding, or it never even goes to phase two. But if it's showing that it's working, now let's do it in a larger group of people. That's what a phase two trial is, to see how well does this drug work. Typically, how it works on its own, sometimes in combination. Sometimes we might even compare it, but typically it's just in a larger group of people to see if the drug works. And then the last form, or the highest form, is what we call a phase three. So if I really believe that this new drug is important, and that combination AB is better than the drug A by itself, then I'm going to do a big phase three trial that says I'm going to compare AB to A, and I have to prove that AB is better than that first standard of care A. Very often in this situation, people are so-called randomized, which means they can't just say, oh, I want the A one, or no, I want the AB arm. You get randomized, which means that reduces the bias involved. It reduces any of the, oh, I got to put this patient in that one and this patient in this one. No, it becomes a mathematical phenomenon to do pure science. It's like saying, do you like Coke or Pepsi more? And I don't want to get people upset when we talk about these things, but you have to be, if you will, blinded to what you're drinking. They got to cover up the cup, because you might, if you see that it's Pepsi, you're like, oh yeah, this does taste better, or this doesn't taste better. That's part of the process. We talk about randomization and sometimes blinding, meaning even as a doctor, as I'm treating a patient, I may not know if a patient is getting A or AB, because it shouldn't influence the way I interpret the way they respond to that. So here's just a table. I won't go through it all again, but where we have those pre-phase one studies, or preclinical studies, we call them in the lab. Phase one to see if it's safe, phase two to see how well it works, phase three to compare it to the standard of care. There is actually also something called phase four, but that's more after a drug has been approved and we get a sense of how does it work in the real world in larger populations. And so when you think about this, we have to again remind ourselves that patients are getting at least the standard of care, and they may be the first ones to benefit from this new therapy. And so in some ways for patients, it may be win-win, because it gives them that opportunity to capture that treatment early on. But as we noted from the start, everything is a balance. There is also a risk. Sometimes we're not as familiar with a drug. We're not as sure exactly what the side effects may be. It may not work in every patient. So that always has to be a balance, because I don't want to be overzealous or underzealous of clinical trials tonight. I'm trying to be balanced for you. Which does bring me towards my almost last couple of slides here to say, well, why do we see low numbers? Why do a lot of clinical trials never make it? Why do a lot of patients not participate in trials? Brian's going to share with us that there are now hundreds of trials in multiple myeloma across the country, and a lot of them don't get filled too quickly. Well, sometimes it's because people didn't come to our Living Well seminar and aren't familiar with SparkCures and didn't know that they're not aware of clinical trials, or they may not have access to trials, which can be a problem geographically and even by race and ethnicity historically, as I'll come to in a moment. People may not trust the system. They have personal obstacles that keep them away. There may be insurance issues, as I've noticed. They're not really sure. They feel that, oh, I'm being unfaithful to my local doctor if I go to another one to do a clinical trial. Let me tell you that that's not the case. We all want the best for you. Or they may not be in a place that can offer trials, or there's some kind of disconnect with their healthcare team. These are, serious reasons. Also, historically, we have had groups of individuals who have not been well represented in clinical trials. I'll give you an example. 20% of myeloma patients are of African descent like myself, and yet most trials have had only 5, 6, 7%. And there are problems with that, because we want to know it's not just about a number. It's about making sure that the drugs we are testing are both safe and effective in all populations, whether by race or ethnicity, by age, by gender, by geographic location. And that's why it becomes so important that we have access for clinical trials for all. But we know that there have been reasons for this, based on, sadly, our history with trials that have frankly misused and abused individuals. And we know about studies like Tuskegee and others where patients, even just based on their race, were treated so poorly through the context of a clinical trial. And those days, thankfully, are gone with respect to our standards. but it takes a long time to rebuild that trust. And that's one of the reasons why the IMF is so committed to this topic and wants everyone to have trials available to them. It's not that everybody has to be on a trial, by no means, but we want to reverse the past of that misconduct and conduct trials in a safe and careful manner. Because as I noted, it is really important that everyone feels welcome, that everyone has that opportunity. This has been taken on by the FDA. This has been taken on by the medical community, by our industry partners. Everyone recognizes that we need a greater and more appropriate representation on clinical trials so that everybody has the opportunity to benefit and that we can ensure that everyone is included. One of the things we've done at the IMF, for example, is we've created the Diversity in Clinical Trials program, which has really coming to fruition over the next several weeks, where we've identified a number of individuals who have been on a trial who are from historically underrepresented groups to share their story. It's one thing to hear it from Dr. Joe. It's another thing to hear it from the patient who's been on. And we're gathering together with them in a few weeks' time, and we're going to be recording some short pieces, some long pieces. It's really exciting to know that they're going to be able to share their stories throughout the whole power of the IMF social media network. And for those of you who know, we have tens of thousands of followers in multiple means, and we want to be able to share their stories. And at those live events that Robin commented on too, many of these patients will be able to come and share their story. And we hope that some of you will come and listen. And as I say, it's one thing to listen to me. It's another thing to listen to Brian. It's another thing indeed to listen to a patient themselves who have been on it. So I close off by saying there are commonly asked questions. You might want to screenshot this, take a picture of this. Of course, the slides are available to you later. But things to remember when you're going in to ask: how is the study going to work? What benefits and risks am I going to expect? Can I keep taking my vitamins when we're doing this? All these kinds of things are important to make sure they're clear and clarified for you so that you can indeed fill out what's a so-called informed consent. You need to understand what's going to happen before it happens to you so that you're not walking into something you don't understand. And this requires a conversation. It's not just about signing a form. How many things do we have to sign every day? You log onto a new app and you have to agree to some long agreement. You just skip to the end and agree. Well, here it's meant to be an important conversation so that we can ensure that people are ready. And with that, I'm going to conclude by saying, as Robin did, we're here for you. The IMF wants to partner with you every step of the journey. And we do so through our info line. We do so through our programs, be it live or in person. We do it through Milo. And now we have the privilege of also doing it when it comes to clinical trials with our dear friends at SparkCures, where we have nested in our own website that you're going to hear about right now. And it's my time to pass it off to Brian, that he is going to share with us more about this SparkCures concept and how we have this really incredible personalized support for patients going through clinical trials. So Brian, I believe we're going to switch over screens here, and we're going to bring your screen forward as we come to talk about how this amazing organization has come together. And thank you again for joining us tonight, brother. I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Hey, Dr. Joe, this is amazing, Robin. It's great to see you. It's great to see everybody here. And I do have one quick shout out, if it's okay. Robin had mentioned my two daughters who are actually watching this right now. So Evie and Allie, hey, it's almost bedtime, but we're glad you're here and learning about clinical trials and multiple myeloma. So just to give you a little sense of who we are here. But it's great to see you, and really great information about clinical trials. And there's a lot to distill there. And I think, where I want to start on these slides is really focusing in on letting you know how supported you are as a myeloma community through our work at SparkCures and our partnership with the International Myeloma Foundation. And if we start here, if you go to myeloma.org, which is the website, all you got to do is scroll down a little bit and you're going to see find a clinical trial here. Now, if I click on that, I think Milo is going to pop up because he wants to say hi. This is the live demo side of everything. But if I click on find a clinical trial, what you're going to see here is our clinical trial portal that is found on the International Myeloma Foundation's website. Now, it's really interesting. I want to start, if you notice here in the upper right-hand corner, it says help. There's a lot of information that Dr. Joe went through. There's a lot of information that I'm going to go through. If you remember nothing else and no other takeaway, know that you can click on this button right here And this is our phone number here at SparkCures. We have a great partnership with the info line. We can pass you off to them. They can pass you off to us. You can actually schedule a call. This is kind of a cool little thing. If I click on this, it actually pops up a calendar in your time zone, and you can select a time and we'll give you a call. And then the other things here are you can text us, you can chat with us, you can email us. So just know we're real people and we're here to help you navigate through these clinical trial options, because no matter how simple we try to make this, it can be a really overwhelming thing. So starting there, I want to go in and Dr. Joe, I have a couple of things I'm going to work through here. Number one, you had talked about clinical trials and targets and along the entire spectrum of a journey. And I think it was really important when we first started working with the IMF. Number one, that nobody had to create an account to work with us. You can go in here if you want and look at clinical trials, and we will give you all the information you need to take that to your doctor, to reach out to a center that might be participating. And if you want to, you can create an account. We're going to talk about why we think that's important. Now, I'm coming to you live from Wexford, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh. And so I had this kind of set up. You're going to see here, when you first get to the trial section, over here, it's going to say sorting 182 trials. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. And I think that what we typically tell people is if we know where you live and we know what your diagnosis is and we know how much treatment you've had, that's kind of like 80 or 90% of the battle. The rest of it is really fine tuning from there. And I'm going to show you here, if I go to 120 miles around Pittsburgh, you can see we went from 180 some all the way down to 21 clinical trials with the click of a button. Now, if you see here, we're going to say show all filters, and I'm going to click on this. And I don't want this to seem too overwhelming, and I know it can be at first pass, but I'm going to share with you one of the things we heard from, and Dr. Joe, you know this on a lot of the Facebook Lives and things, newly diagnosed patients might ask about a CAR T, right? CAR T cell therapy. And I want to share with everybody here, we make it really easy to navigate down. So you can do high level searches or you can go really deep if you want to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this treatment classifications drop down, and I'm going to select CAR T cell. And what I want to do here is I'm going to say CAR T, and I'm going to say my treatment history is that I'm untreated and newly diagnosed. And you can see that that 182 went down to 3 trial options. So with a few clicks of a button, we're able to really limit down the number of clinical trial options that we're showing to people. Now, is a quick example here for anyone that might be relapse refractory, meaning your myeloma has returned or gotten worse after having some treatments. I want to go through and do a quick demo of how this could help you. If we look at your treatment history, I'm going to click on relapse refractory. And an example that we had recently was someone came to us in a relapse refractory state and said, my doctor wants me to look at CAR T trials, but they'd recently had a BCMA therapy. Now, I don't want this to turn into alphabet soup, and I know sometimes that can be a lot, but Dr. Joe talked about those targets that you can find on top of myeloma cells. And BCMA is one of those targets that we can look at. Another one has kind of a funny name of GPRC5D. And I just want to share with you how we can use this to actually go down to classification, meaning CAR T cell, and then we can get even more granular to talk about the type of targets. And you can see across the entire US, there are 6 clinical trials looking at CAR T that have a GPRC5D target. And this is the way that our system can really help you to have a better conversation with your doctor, with your care team, and really figure out what these options might look like. And the last thing before I get into the account side to show you the real power that comes with creating an account with us, I do want to share on the center side, you can search and kind of flip it. So instead of saying, I want to look for a clinical trial by a specific or individualized trial, you can do it by looking at centers that are running and participating in research. And I think this is really important because if we go here, so right now there are 46 centers running all over the country, and I can show you what they look like. So you can see Wexford, PA is right here with this home. And you can see where all the centers running a CAR T for relapse refractory targeting GPRC5D is. But if I click here, I can say sort by trial count. And why this is important is one of the things that I think might come up in the Q&A is how difficult it can be sometimes to get into a clinical trial, because even if it's open and accepting patients, sometimes there's not an availability or slot to give people treatment. And we look at this and we think, okay, University of Alabama at Birmingham, Dr. Costa has 3 CAR Ts looking at GPRC5D. Memorial Sloan Kettering up in New York has 3. So if you're interested in that specific type of trial, you might be better going to a center that's running a couple of those trials, in essence, improving your chances of potentially getting access to one of those therapies. So these are some of the ways that you can think about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition back here to the SparkCures page on the International Myeloma Foundation's website. And the way to go about creating an account, you'll see this little shadow circle guy up here in the corner. And if you click on that, you can actually create an account through Facebook. You can create it through Google, or you can create it by signing up through your email. And just as a brief example, if you click on create your account, there's going to be some questions here: email address, username, first name. And down here, one of the last questions you're going to see is, would you like to explore your clinical trial options? Now, if you say, yes, I want to see my clinical trial options, when you create your IMF account, we're going to link it with SparkCures, and you're going to be able to see all of your account-based clinical trial matching directly at myeloma.org. Now, you can also say no for right now if you don't want to, and we'll still let you, search and go through this as a guest. Now, if I go back up to the login page here, and I'm going to share with you what my account looks like. I'm going to do this. Okay. Now, when you first get into the profile, you're going to see here at the very top right corner, it says My Clinical Trials. And if I click on View My Clinical Trials, this is where the power of SparkCures really comes in, and the power of the partnership with the IMF, because every clinical trial being run around the US is now being matched and evaluated to. Now, I don't have multiple myeloma. My account is a demo account. But what I'm going to show you is this is all the clinical trials across the entire US that are matched to you as an individual. And I'm going to start here again. You can see on the help side, we have our phone number, schedule a call, and all the ways that you can call to get help. We're also going to see a new thing here on the right-hand side that says My Account. Now, if we click on the My Account, you're going to see here, there's some information, my first name, last name, birthday. This is all information that we will use solely to match clinical trials to you. We have a rule of thumb that we try not to ask a question unless it really impacts the matching process. And if I move here on the left-hand side to My Locations, what you're going to see is my location, my home location, which is Wexford, PA. And I have a search distance. This means by default, I'm going to start and see clinical trials that are within a 120-mile radius of my home location. But this My Centers of Support is something that came up early on in SparkCures. We started getting calls from patients, and they said, I want to add more than one location to my account. And we said, why would you want to do that? And they said, well, my sister lives in Phoenix, and my best friend from college lives in Charlotte. They're places where people could travel to, and they would be supported in order to join a clinical trial. And we called them My Centers of Support, and we actually allow you to add as many of those as you want to. And you can put in a mile radius search around this. And I'm going to show you how we can use that in just a minute when I start looking at the trials. If I click on myeloma, which is the diagnosis, you can see we have data diagnosis. We have disease status, in this case, relapse refractory. And we have risk stratification. And these ones I'm not going to get into too deep, but if you know what CNS involvement is, you can go ahead and answer that appropriately for you. It's not as common, but it's there, and it can be an exclusion or a reason that clinical trials might not allow you to join them. And underneath myeloma, you're going to see labs and treatments. Now, labs is we go in and we have common labs. So we have the most commonly used labs that we're going to look at for clinical trial matching. And that's ANC, creatinine, free light chains, your M spike, and platelets. Now you can see I have some information here about all of mine, but I want to share with you, if I click on an M spike and I want to add this, we're going to tell you a little bit about what this lab is. We're going to tell where you can find it. And we're also going to show you all the names that it's going to show up as on that lab. And you can enter that value and put in your date. Now we can do a lot of other labs as well, absolute lymphocytes, ALTs, ASTs. These are things that are less common. And what I typically tell people is, number one, if you're not actively looking for a clinical trial, you don't need to fill this out, right? We don't want to have homework for you or add another job in terms of everything else that you're doing. And if your platelets are at 350, you don't need to add them in either. It's only if we're finding lower values or maybe higher in some cases like creatinine that you would need to add that in there. So our system is really conservative and really forgiving if you don't provide that information right away. And the last thing I'm going to share here, and this is probably one of the more complex slides or one of the more complex aspects of the profile. And it's like that for a good reason. It's because we have a lot of approved drugs for myeloma. So you can see here, you can add in your lines of therapy, and then it shows you what my current therapy is. So in this one, for my demo account, I'm currently on Dara, Palm, Dex. And it shows you everything that I've never been treated with, like an allogeneic stem cell transplant, belantamab mafodotin, carfilzomib, all the way down. And it shows you all the treatments that I've received in the past. Now, this is important because we use your treatment history and your labs to help determine and break down your trials into one of three buckets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my trials and I'm going to show you. Now, remember, this is all personalized to my account. And it's going to start here by showing all of the trials in Wexford that I may be currently eligible for. And actually, let me click here. Do this. Okay. It's going to show all the trials in Wexford that I may currently be eligible for within 120 miles. And you can see there are 8 clinical trials. Now, I think when I first went there on the guest account for relapse refractory, I think there was 20 some. So you can see all of a sudden it's not 25, it's 8 because it's based off of my actual eligibility criteria. Now, if you look here, this is the new filter that we have, and this is a really powerful part of our system. This is where you can see things that you may be currently eligible for now, things that you might be eligible for in the future if something changes. So, for instance, some clinical trials will say you're not eligible until you've had a CAR T. Or if you've had a CAR T cell treatment, you're no longer eligible. So, on things that you're not yet eligible for because something has to change, whether it's labs or additional treatment, it's going to go into this bucket. And the last one is no longer eligible. So, for full transparency, we'll actually show you all the things. And something that might run, that might make you not eligible is something like having a donor stem cell transplant or an allogeneic stem cell transplant. There are a number of clinical trials that say once you have a donor stem cell transplant, you can no longer participate. So these are the ways that you can really go through and search on this side. Now, much like I showed in the demo version, you can look at it for trials, and we can go through here. And if I say show all trials, you can say I'm looking for a bispecific antibody. And you can open this up and say how many bispecific antibodies are within my travel radius. So in this case, with just a few clicks having my account here, I got it down from 21 to 8 to 2 clinical trials that I can then click through and I can print this out. I can take it into my doctor's appointment. You can call us for a conversation, or you can actually click through and make an appointment at the center that's running this trial directly from our site and go through it in that way. Now, the other side is we can also look at the centers. So every center is going to be in our system as well. And you can see that the 2 centers within 120 miles that are running bispecific trials that I might be eligible for are Cleveland Clinic and WVU. Now, I can also open that up to anywhere across the US. And if I do that, it's going to go from 2 centers to 105 centers. So this really helps you to be able to narrow things down or broaden them. And as we shared on the location and the centers of support here, you'll see a little bookmark next to our Wexford PA. And if I click on this, you're going to see all the centers of support that I have. So if I want to click on Phoenix, and I'm going to see everything within Phoenix, Arizona, 60 miles that may have a bispecific antibody clinical trial for me, it's at Banner. And I can click back on the trials to see what that ultimately is. That's a trial called Majestic 10. Or I can click up here and say, I want to look at Seattle, Washington. And I can see if I go there, there's 2 clinical trials. So it really helps you. You can move around the country looking city by city. Or the last thing I want to share here before we move into the Q&A side of things is if I click on the search button, let's say I want to look at clinical trials at a specific center like MD Anderson. So I can click on MD Anderson here, and it's going to load in there, and it's going to show me all the clinical trials at MD Anderson that I may be eligible for that are bispecific antibody clinical trials. And I can do this for any center. I can look at Dana-Farber, I can look at Moffitt, I can look at Mayo, I can look at City of Hope. I can go through and really see at a center by center basis what's available for me based on my specific profile on the IMF's website to see what this looks like. And I'm going to pause there for a second, Dr. Joe. I don't know if you want to chime in on anything, or I can stop the share here, but I think that really helps to show the power. And I think the last reminder is it's a lot to cover. You can click here, You can call us. We'd love to hear from you. You can schedule a call or you can chat live with us because it is a lot to take in. It's a lot to sort of manage, and we're here to help you out on that side.
Awesome, Brian. Wow. Rapid fire as it always is with you. If someone found that a little bit quick, not to worry. You can always rewatch the replay. You can call us the info line. You can speak to SparkCures as we've heard. But a couple of things that before we dive into the questions, that I took away from this, and I will dive into some of the questions as we go because some of them are very relevant to what you discussed with us, Brian. Was that this is the sort of tool that you could use to the level you feel comfortable. That if you want to just do some anonymous searching, do some anonymous searching. You want to go all in and give all your information so that you can take advantage of all those filters, that's great. But I do think it's very important that we have those options for patients to know what's best for them. So
Yeah, we call it the choose your own adventure model, right? So it's if you're able to go, and we have patients that will call us, they start searching at 4 o'clock in the morning, they're on a dex kick. And then 6 months later, we hear from them because they got onto a clinical trial and they just wanted to let us know, right? And then you have other people that really want a lot of hand holding, which is a really important piece that we do to walk them through what questions do you ask your doctor? How do you get connected, step by step by step by step. So great point.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let's start some of the questions. We got a good 10 minutes of questions here before we pass it off to Robin, the hostess with the mostest, to close us off today. But I do want to add one caveat before we answer the questions: is that some of these questions, there's so many great questions that come in. We'll get to as many as we can. Some of these questions are very sort of specific to, this is my treatment now. What do you recommend? Remember that we take all questions seriously at the IMF. And we have multiple ways to answer them. We may not get to all of them tonight. I'm going to try to focus on the questions that are relevant towards clinical trials. But for those questions, remember, you can always use the hashtag AskTheIMF in any social media, or even just entering them here. We keep track of all of these, and we have multiple ways to answer questions. I often do videos to answer multiple questions together. I did a Facebook Live last weekend. We have one coming up with Dr. Urvi Shaw, as was shared with us. And Dr. Shaw actually is going to be talking about diet. So some of the questions here are related to diet and how that could influence myeloma. Bring those questions to Dr. Shaw, and we'll give her a preview of the questions that came in on that realm. So we apologize if we can't get to all of them, but we'll do as much as we can. Here was a great question. John asked a lot of questions, and he asked this one: are there statistics that demonstrate that participants in clinical trials have improved quality of life and improved life expectancy by receiving trial treatments versus the placebo? The short answer here is, John, actually, yes. We know when we have looked at, in particular, myeloma too, it's a little bit harder to fully capture quality of life, but we've seen it both in quality and quantity of life. When we look at the things that have significantly moved the needle, as it were, or improved survival, even in individuals, not just in large groups of people, it has been the introduction of different major steps in myeloma. Transplant was one, combination therapies was another, clinical trials is indeed a third one, and we believe number 4, CAR T-cell therapy, is starting to do that now as well. But even we just focus on trials, there is no doubt when we look at outcomes based on centers that have clinical trials, people who have been on trials versus those that have not been on trials, we see a repeated truth that indeed that is better. And while we're on the subject of John's great questions, given the current Down with Dex movement, thank you for recognizing it as a movement, because it's a movement I'm trying to lead. How we use this drug in clinical practice, for those who aren't familiar, we've been sharing a lot with the recent trend of not giving people dexamethasone forever, and particularly trying to tape it down and maybe even discontinue it. Part of the question here is saying, have trials been able to carry this out? And the reality is, I was actually just giving another talk earlier today in our hospital about how now clinical trials are being designed to use less dexamethasone. A very important French trial, for example, is only giving 2 months of dexamethasone in the trial. So I think that's particularly important. Here's a question for you, Brian, that I wanted you to address, because it has to do with a bit of that discussion we had earlier around the tool that you have. Who has access to the information that you enter in the login for SparkCures?
Meaning the account side of things, I'm guessing? Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah, just us, just our internal team. So that doesn't go anywhere else. And even when we work through, our partnership, that handoff doesn't touch any other person or any other individual or anything outside of our sort of walled garden of SparkCures. Great question.
Excellent. And do you have trials outside of the US that are captured by this, or is it exclusively in the US? Someone was asking about US and Canada, for example.
Yeah, it's US right now. We're expanding. We have a pilot program going into Canada right now, but as you can imagine, regulatory and compliance issues are all over the map and very different from what happens in the US. So we're cautiously going into those waters. The goal would be we want to get this to people wherever they may be without regard to country borders. But the reality is there's some difficulties on top of that we're working through. So great question.
Understood. And on that same note, internally, are all trials available on SparkCures in the US, or could there be other ones that would not be found in the SparkCures search engine?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are some supportive clinical trials, meaning there might be a trial looking at a way to prophylactically support graft versus host disease in a donor stem cell transplant, something where people aren't getting treatment. It's a supportive measure against, different ways to help out a patient. We don't have 100% coverage on that right now. And we did that very purposefully because there's already enough clinical trials that are out there that if we started putting in all those supportive, it'd be really, really difficult for people to navigate through. So we're looking at ways that we can add those in, but for the most part, you're going to find the treatment trials, absolutely, but some supportive clinical trials are not going to be there.
Excellent. Lots of questions around this notion of, if I come from out of the country, can I come and do a clinical trial in the US? Or even are there trials that could be available for people outside the country? And my answer to that is it really depends. It depends on the trial, depends on the scenario. But yes, the vast majority of trials don't mandate that you are a resident of that town or city or even that country. I have patients that have come to me from all over the world to participate in clinical trials. Often, just being very open and honest about it, it is challenging with respect to cost, unless that person, as sometimes it happens, people do have insurance coverage that covers them here, but it can be an expensive endeavor. And also, there's another question on the same note that says, well, do all trials really require that I be at the center all the time? And that, now I've got to sort of move to that place. Brian had talked about geographical being close to you. But we have different kinds of trials. There are some trials where, yes, you're expected to be there for a few weeks, like a CAR T trial, or you may have to be there for a few weeks, especially for a bispecific trial. But there are other trials. I've engaged patients from out of state who come in once a month or once every couple of months, ultimately, for different kinds of trials. Because sometimes we have very promising drugs, for example, in myeloma, that are just pills. And those pills may not be available locally, but they come. And we have worked. In fact, one of the tiny silver linings of COVID has been that even as a clinical trial world in our regulatory pathways, we've come to realize that maybe not every single visit has to be in person with that doctor or that team. Maybe not every single lab has to be done at that central lab. Sometimes people can do it locally. And this has resulted in some of our patients having a little bit more flexibility in their travel and in their ability to participate in these trials so that they don't have to, be traveling all the time for them. Here's a good question that says, are most trials available for high-risk patients? In general, the answer is yes. We sometimes do trials that are for non-high-risk patients, but those are by no means the majority. And Brian did show that that's one of the riders that can be included in his. We also now are sometimes trying to do trials for high risk, because high risk is a challenging area, that there's sometimes when patients have a more aggressive disease that can't be that can't be controlled as well as we would like it to be. Here's a good question. It says, is there any financial support for subjects who want to participate in a trial geographically far away from their home? And again, the short answer is maybe, and perhaps more than you might think. I've seen this in action with many of my patients. We've been able to interact. Sometimes it's the trial itself. Sometimes it's the patient's individual insurance company that has that, because especially if they know there's going to be a likely derived benefit for that patient, then often, like we've seen, to go to a CAR T cell therapy or to go to a stem cell transplant, often there's a travel stipend, there's coverage for those kinds of things, staying overnight and the like too. So I don't want to say that's the norm, but that can happen. There's another great
Dr.
question.
Joe,
Yes, please.
can I chime in on that real quick?
Chime in.
So it's a really great question, because the unfortunate answer in most things with this is it all depends and we don't know. So I think the resounding refrain here is you have to be a good advocate for yourself and ask a lot of questions. Because if we think about it, even if a sponsor, whoever's running the study, they might have a financial assistance, they might have hotel, lodging, travel, those things, but they individually contract with the centers. So one center may have it and another may not. So it really becomes a very complex situation. So these are great questions, and it's things that you should be asking your doctor, asking the trial coordinator, and asking the financial resource person. And those are things that we can help you with as some of those conversations. But Dr. Joe, I'm sure you get this a lot too. And I always say to people, I hate that I can't give you a straight answer, but there really are, it's all kind of, it depends, it depends, it depends. And we need to ask is kind of the way to think about it.
And I think what I want to emphasize in your beautiful answer, Brian, is that we're here with you. We want to help you do this, and we can do this as best we can. And as a clinical trialist, there's a patient who said, if I started a trial in Florida, can I continue it at the Michigan site? Well, if that site is on the trial, then we will do our best. I live in Arizona. I have patients who spend the winters here and the summers in cooler places, and we have that arrangement. Two final questions, Robin, before I turn it to you, because I want to give you a few minutes to close off. But I think these are really great questions. One says, what protocols are in place to identify treatment side effects well before they become critical? Thank you for asking this. One of the things about our clinical practice, when I'm seeing a patient regularly, I always want to ask them what's happening. Do I see any side effects from everything? But in a clinical trial, sometimes it's even more, if you will, obsessive. We often have these very detailed list of questions that we must ask every patient every time. And that often gives us an opportunity to catch things early. Clinical trials are designed for that sensitivity to know. We don't want to wait until 10 people on the trial have had shortness of breath before we figure out that shortness of breath may be associated with this drug. And so we do try to take those precautions. And then lastly, here is a great question. When is it time to search out potential clinical trials for relapse? Before the relapse to get an idea of what's available, or after the relapse occurs? And thank you, Karen, for this great question. I think the simplest way for me to answer it is the way I always say my favorite answer to any question is all of the above. I don't want people to be in fear of relapse and start searching and feel that they need 20 contingencies. But I would say get accustomed to the tool, learn to use it, get familiar with it. The reality is, if you do search, if it were too soon, things could change. I say this all the time to my patients when they say, well, doc, what are you going to treat me with when I relapse? Well, that's like saying, what am I going to have at a restaurant in 6 months from now? I don't know what's on the menu. And the menu in myeloma keeps changing, which is a good thing. And so, Karen, I think it's good to get used to the tool and the modality so that you're ready. And then, of course, when that relapse is starting, thankfully in myeloma, we tend to be able to know when it's coming. Then a more detailed search could be had. There's so much more we could answer. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Let me turn it back to you, Robin, to close us off. Thank you so much.
Well, Dr. Joe and Brian, this is eye-opening to so many people. And I would say, as a 25-year care partner in the myeloma world, I think we just have to dip our toe in and learn a little bit to feel more confident that trials can be for you. Talk to your doctors and your healthcare team about what's available. Play a little bit on SparkCures to just explore. It's always good to learn more and more. So right now we're going to wrap things up a little bit and remind you where you can find this replay. And of course, we highly recommend listen to it again. Slow it down. I know that there's a lot of information here. So take another look at it when you have the time. And again, please provide us with your feedback. It is so important. And Dr. Joe knows we painstakingly go through these evaluations and try to make sure that we make each and every program the best that it can be. And again, please don't forget about taking your action during Myeloma Action Month, because together we can make this world a better place. So we thank our sponsors, Johnson & Johnson and Regeneron, but we especially thank each and every one of you for being on here. Please call the info line, attend your support groups, talk to your doctors, and know that we are here for you. Right, Dr. Joe? Right, Brian?
That's right.
Absolutely, every step of the way. It's great to
Okay.
have everybody here tonight too, Robin. To see the volume of questions and to see the great interest is great. And this is really just the beginning for many. So thank you so much. And Brian, let me thank you on the behalf of the IMF as well, not only for your partnership, but for your zeal, your passion, and your interest in doing this. And we look forward to being able to help a lot of patients.
Goes both ways. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.